Hey, good morning, everyone. It's so good to have you today. I came in a little late when Brian was doing the announcements, but if you're a guest or if you've never filled one out, we'd love for you to fill this out. I promise we're not going to spam your email and text you all the time and, that kind of stuff. But we do send out occasional updates on what's going on in our church and if there's events coming up. And so this is a great way to just keep up with that. And if you've never filled one out, we have a gift for you that we'd love to give you. It's a good gift. It's a coffee cup. It's good. I spoiled the surprise, but it's a coffee cup, and it's out where you can get coffee over there. So if you can drop that off, we'd love to be able to give that to you. Today we're going to be in 1 Samuel 17. If you have a Bible, we'd love for you to turn there. We'll have it on the screen as well. If you don't have a Bible, we'd love to give you one. And on your way out today, that table back in the back, the white table, there's some Bibles there. That's our gift to you. We'd love for you to take that. And we're starting a brand new series today called David, The Rise and Fall of David. You may or may not be familiar with the story of David. That's okay. If you are, it's going to be a refresher for you. We're going to look at some of the parts of his life. If you've never heard of this, I encourage you to come back each week for this series because we're really going to dive into David as a man, as a leader. Because here's what we know about leadership. All of us are leaders. Now, you may not think that about yourself, but you lead something. You lead something. You may lead a big business. You may run a whole department somewhere. You may just lead a small part of a business. You may lead a sales team. You lead in your home, certainly. And at the very least, and this is not that it's the least, but on the smallest scale, maybe you lead yourself. We're all leaders. Some of you volunteer here in Church 8025, and you lead in that aspect. All of us are leaders. And what we know about leaders is that the ones we like have some great attributes, don't they? Like we can say, man, that's a good leader, and here's why. Here's why they're a good leader. We can point those out. But we also know the bad attributes of leaders, don't we? We know why, man, I hate working for him. I hate being a follower of that. I hate that I have to be here because here's the negative aspects of them. And so today we're going to talk about, and really for this whole series, we're going to look at the leadership of David and how it applies to you, how it applies to me in our lives. And today we're going to look at the aspect of hope. Right? Because a leader always seems to have hope, don't they? They can always take the hill. They can always win. They can always get to the next thing. And that's why typically they're a leader. That's why people choose to follow them. That's why they get that promotion is they always think, hey, there is hope in this situation. So we're going to look at hope today as we look at David. But there's an important thing about hope. We have to put our hope in the right place. I went skydiving a few years. Has anybody ever been skydiving? Anybody? A few of you? Yeah, okay. All right, a few brave souls in here. I went skydiving a few years ago, me and one of my friends who was terrified of heights, just terrified. I never thought he was going to jump out of the plane, especially once we got up in the plane, and his face was just ghost white. And I was talking to him. The guys that we were jumping with was talking to him, and he couldn't acknowledge anything. He was just staring at us. We'd be like, hey, are you excited? And he was just like... And I thought, man, we're going to be cleaning throw up out of the inside of this plane. It's going to happen. And we scooted to the edge of the seats, and you're strapped onto an instructor, a guide. He's behind you, and they're making all these jokes, like they're saying to each other, hey, does this look right on his parachute? Oh, I'm sure it'll be fine, that kind of stuff. And you're in the plane. You can't see it anymore. He's like, you think this one's going to come unhooked like the last one? And you're just hooked into him. He's like, you're at the end of the event here. You can't get out at this point. And so as we're scooting to the edge of the seat, ultimately, what I had to decide is where is my hope in that moment, right? And my hope was fully invested in that instructor. He packed the chute. He hooked up to me. He clipped in. He was going to read the altimeter. He was going to know when to go out of the plane. I was as much along for the ride as you can possibly be along for the ride. I had no control over the situation at all. The only thing that I had control over was screaming like a middle school girl. That's it. And I did very much. I have the video to prove it. I had to put my hope in him, and we all put our hope in something. And so we're going to look today about hope when it comes to leadership. And so we're going to be talking about David for these 4 weeks and see these important facts in 1 Samuel 17 is where we're going to start today. Now, the little background here, at this time, kingdoms, they fought each other a lot. They fought a lot. They would fight over land. They would fight over people. Like the goal, if you were king, was just to grow your territory as far as you could grow it, to make sure you were secure as a king. And that is what is happening here. War was common. And Israel, the nation of Israel, they fought a lot as well, because they were taking over land. They were expanding their kingdom, and other nations were fighting against them. And one of their main enemies, when you read in the Old Testament, one of their biggest enemies that they constantly were fighting was a group of people called the Philistines. It was just a nation of people that constantly fought against Israel. And so we're going to pick it up. They're at war with the Philistines. Israel and the Philistines are fighting each other. And here's what it says. Now, listen, we're going to do some work today, okay? We're going to be in Scripture a lot today. So if you have a Bible on your phone, pull it out. We're going to read a lot, but this is important to us as we examine leadership. Here's what it says in verse 2. Saul and the men of Israel gathered and camped in the valley of Elah. Saul is the king of Israel. Then they lined up in battle formation to face the Philistines. It goes on to say the Philistines were standing on one hill and the Israelites were standing on another hill with a ravine in between them. So here's the picture. The Israelites, the army is on this hillside over here. The Philistines are on a hillside over here, and there's a big valley in between them. And this is before guns and cannons and that kind of thing. And so to do battle, you had to get close. Like you had to get up close and personal with somebody. There was none of this long range, hey, where did that come from? Like you knew the person who was about to kill you. You had to get close. And so one standing on a hillside, the other standing on a hillside, they know war is imminent. And this is what it says. Then a champion named Goliath, maybe you've heard of Goliath before, from Gath came out from the Philistine camp. He was 9 feet and 9 inches tall. I'm 6 feet tall. This is a big guy. This guy is huge. And he wore a bronze helmet and a bronze scale of armor that weighed 125 pounds. Now, I've carried rucks in the military before, and I'm going to tell you, armor that weighs 125 pounds is insane. To be able to move in hand-to-hand combat, right? This is not like sitting somewhere and letting the gun do the work. This is, I'm going out to fight you. He had 125 pounds of armor on him. It goes on to say, then there was a bronze armor on his shins, and bronze javelin was slung between his shoulders. His spear shaft was like a weaver's beam. I'm not sure what a weaver's beam is. If you know, let me know later. And the iron point of his spear weighed 15 pounds. Now, 15 pounds, when you first think about it, it doesn't seem like a lot. But when we use 15 pounds, it's like picking it up from here and moving it here, maybe doing some lunges or whatever you do with 15 pounds. He's got it on the end of his weapon that he's throwing across a battlefield accurately. I challenge you the next time you're around a 15-pound weight or dumbbell, you might get in trouble. Maybe don't do this. But think about how far you could throw that and accurately hit something. 15 pounds was what was on his spear. And have you ever been in a fight? This is the second thing. Have you ever been in a fight? You don't have to raise your hand, okay? Because there's kids in the room and we don't fight. But some of you have fought, okay? And here's the first thing. I've been in a fight before. Here's one of the first things that you think. It's about to go down and you think, can I what? Can I win? Right? Can I win this fight? Can I win this fight? And so this man is out on this field calling out people. And it goes on to say this in verse 8. He stood and shouted to the Israelite battle formations, "Why do you come out to line up in battle formation? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not servants of Saul? Choose one of your men, have him come down against me." He says, if he wins in a fight against me and kills me, we will be your servants. But if I win against him and kill him, then you will be our servants and serve us. Then the Philistine said, I defy the ranks of Israel today. I defy the ranks today. Send me a man so we can fight each other. So the armies are on the sides here, and this Philistine comes out to the middle, and he begins calling out the army. And this is not in some macho way, like, hey, send me your big guy. When you study this in the original language, what he's doing there, this calling out, it really means to taunt, to make fun of, to defame. He's saying this because he knows they're not sending anybody. He's really teasing them. This is not, hey, you bring me your best guy and let's go at it. This is like, hey, got anybody out there who wants to come fight? No? Nobody? Like he's teasing them. He's taunting them in the middle of this trash talking in front of their king, Saul. He says, hey, if you will come out and kill me, then we'll follow you. But if I kill you, you have to follow us. And guess what? Nobody runs out to fight him. I know, that's shocking, isn't it? Nobody's like, yeah, I'll do that. Let me go. Nobody runs out to him. Look how they responded instead. It says, when Saul, that's the king, and all Israel heard these words from the Philistines, they lost their courage and were terrified. They lost courage and they were terrified. Here we are, this nation that's terrified. They're looking at this situation. They see this giant of a man standing there calling them out, and they have no hope. And why don't they have hope? They should, right? This is not the first battle they fought. This is not even the first time they fought the Philistines. They have fought wars before, but why are they terrified? Why did they lose their courage? Why are they hopeless now? Well, they're hopeless because of the same reasons we're often hopeless. They're hopeless because of what they placed their hope in. See, they had placed their hope in their king, Saul. Their hope as a nation was in their king, Saul. Why was it in Saul? Look back in 1 Samuel chapter 8. Let's look at how he became king. When Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons as judges over Israel. So Samuel is a prophet to the nation of Israel. This is the way that God would speak to Israel. He would speak through Samuel. That's how God had done it over and over again. His firstborn son's name was Joel, and his second son was named Abijah. They were judges in Beersheba. However, his sons did not walk in his ways. They turned toward dishonest profit, took bribes, and perverted justice. So Samuel was a respected man. He was a prophet of God, and he wanted to hand it over to his sons, but they were kind of little weasels, actually, is what it looks like. And so he didn't want to hand it over to them. So all the elders of Israel gathered together. They went to Samuel at Ramah, and they said to him, look, you're old. That's not a great way to start a conversation, okay? I'm just going to go ahead and give you that. They didn't have a lot of tact. Look, you're old and your sons do not walk in your ways. You're old, your sons don't walk in your ways. Therefore, appoint a king to judge us, the same as all the other nations have. Now, here's why this is important. Israel had never had a king before. They had always had a judge. Every nation around them had a king that ruled over them, the king who set the law, the king who set the decrees. You did what the king said. Israel never had one. They always had a judge that gave them words from God. And at this point, they're saying, we want a king. But God had created them differently. He created them to be ruled by a judge, not ruled by a king. And really being ruled by a judgment, they were ruled by God instead of a person. He wanted them to look differently than the nations around him. Let's keep looking. It says this. When they said, give us a king to judge us, Samuel considered their demand wrong. So he prayed to the Lord. He knew what this was going to lead to. Samuel knew this was going to be bad for them. But the Lord told him, listen to the people and everything they say to you. They've not rejected you. They have rejected me as their king. He tells Samuel, listen, this isn't about you. They've rejected me, God, creator, as the one who's supposed to rule over them, and they want a king. He tells Samuel, it's not you. And if you keep reading how they have choose their king, it's an amazing story. I encourage you to go continue reading this. It's an amazing story. Now, I don't know the qualifications. I don't know the way that you should go about choosing your first king, right? Once you get a king, it's kind of in the family. But to get the first king, I feel like there should at least be open tryouts, you know? Hey, we're going to do some sprints. We're going to throw a javelin. We're going to arm wrestle, something. We're going to do something to qualify who gets to be the king, make all the decision, and rule these people. But that's not what happened here. Do you know how they chose their king? He was the tallest one. That's it. They're like, hey, that guy Saul, he's taller than everybody else. I bet he'd make a good king. And everybody is like, I think you're right. Yeah. Nobody was like, hey guys, I've never done this king thing before, but can we put a little more thought into this? You know, can we talk to him at first? At least, you know, everyone's like, yeah, he's a tall guy. Let's make him king. So they make Saul king. Imagine if that's what your work was like. Imagine going into work tomorrow. You go into your school. You go into your company. You go into your place of business, to your office, and And somebody comes up and says, hey, listen, we think we can make this school run smoother. We think we can make more profit at this business. We think we can sell more homes in this real estate company. And so there's going to be some changes around here. And they're going to start today. And you're like, hey, that's great. That sounds great. And so in order to make these changes, we need you to do something. We need everybody who works here to come out in the hallway and line up smallest to tallest, right? And whoever's on the end, you're in charge now. I mean, that's the equivalent. And you think, that's crazy. You can't run a company that... They literally decided to run a nation that way. Tallest to smallest, tallest guy wins, and he became the king. That's essentially what they did. And here's what's most ironic about this, is there are people put their hope in this king, like the other nations. They put their hope in him as king because he's tall. But what's destroying their confidence? What's stealing their hope right now? A tall guy, right? They're like, hey, we trust in this. Oh, man, he's taller than him. Well, our hope has been in him because he's tall. And now there's a taller guy. So what do we do? That's what they were thinking. That's why they lost hope. They show us a problem that we face often when we lead our families, when we lead in a business, when we make decisions about our future, when we lead ourselves. They face the problem that we face. We place our hope in what and who, we place our trust in what and who we think we can depend on. We say, hey, I'm going to trust in the person. I'm going to trust in the thing that I think I can depend on. Here's the problem with that. When they let us down, we lose hope. When we trust in our job, when we trust in our money, when we trust in a person, when we trust in a position, when we trust in a title, when those things let us down, we lose hope. That's exactly what's going on here. They trust in Saul because he is a tall person. What could get in the way? Another taller person. That's the problem. And God knows this about us, and he knew this about Israel. That's why he created them to have no king. He didn't want them to put their trust in a king. He wanted them to trust in him as their God for provision and for protection and guidance. He wanted the confidence to come in those people out of their relationship with him, not out of their trust in a king. He knew this about them, knows this about us. What you place your trust in, your hope depends on. What you place your trust in, your hope depends on. Whatever it is, whatever that thing, whoever that person, whatever that title, whatever that position that you place your trust in, that's what your hope depends on. They wanted a king to trust in. And it sets the stage for the second king, perhaps the greatest king. And so we're going to jump back to the main story. Goliath is out and he's mocking the nation of Israel. It says that he's been doing this for 40 days. This was not a one-time deal. Every morning, the armies would come out to their hillsides, and he would come out to the valley, and he would make fun of Israel for 40 days. And then David, who's just a shepherd at home, really nobody knows him at this point. David is not popular at this point. He's really on the first Grubhub mission. He's delivering food to his brothers who are at war. They send a message back home to dad and say, Pops, they ain't feeding us good up here. And he sends his youngest son, who's a shepherd, to give them some food. And so he's taking food to their brothers. And look what it says back in 1 Samuel 17 and verse 20. So David got up early in the morning. He left the flock with someone to keep it. He loaded up and he set out as Jesse, that's his dad, had charged him. He arrived at the perimeter of the camp as the army was marching out to its battle formation, shouting their battle cry. So for 40 days, they would walk out here. I'm guessing by this point, it was a pretty weak battle cry because they knew how it was going to go. Israel and the Philistines lined up in their battle formations facing each other, and David left his supplies in the care of the quartermaster and ran to the battle line. And when he arrived, he asked his brothers how they were. It goes on to say, while he was speaking with them, suddenly the champion named Goliath, the Philistine from Gath, came forward from the Philistine battle line and shouted his usual words. Like they were used, the writer didn't even put it in here. He's like, I'm so sick of hearing him shout it, which David heard. And this is the first time that David hears this. When all the Israelite men saw Goliath, they retreated from him terrified. So David is delivering food, a little shepherd boy. No one knows who he is. He drops the food off. And like any young person who sees something exciting going on, he's like, I want to go see what's happening, So he comes up to the battle line and he sees this giant man come out and he hears what this man has to say. And he turns to look at the warriors and they're all running away. And he's standing on this hillside with all of the soldiers who ran. And then it says this, that David said, David spoke to the men who were standing with him. What will be done for the man who kills that Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Just who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? That uncircumcised Philistine means that he's out of the covenant of God. God has not promised protection and overwatch of this man. And then it says this after verse 26. Oh, we'll get there in just a minute. Oh, here we go. We're going back. David spoke to the man. Oh, sorry, I already read that one. Who he should defy the armies of the living God. And I love this because David's just a boy. Like he doesn't get the intricacies of war. He doesn't understand what's going on. He doesn't understand that these are professional soldiers. I mean, he sees it, but he doesn't really let it sink into him right there. And he says, man, this guy, he's not in the covenant of God. He's not promised anything by God. Why are we letting him talk like this? And word gets back to Saul, the king, who this has been going on for 40 days. And so Saul's like, what? Somebody's kind of speaking up about this? Somebody wants to fight Goliath? Yeah, bring him in. And so they take David and they take him into the tent of Saul. And Saul's excited. He thinks, finally, somebody's going to go do this. I don't have to go do this because I want to stay king. And I think he's probably going to kill me if I go down there. So somebody else is going to go do it. And then this young shepherd boy walks in. And to say Saul was disappointed would be an overstatement, right? Like he was just like, man, this is the guy? This is the guy who's going to go fight? Like he's so disappointed by the person that is brought into them, this kid, this shepherd that no one knows. But look what David says to him. David answered Saul. He says this, your servant has been tending his father's sheep. Whenever a lion or a bear came and carried off a lamb from the flock, I went after it, struck it down and rescued the lamb from its mouth. If it reared up against me, I would grab it by its fur. Your servant has killed lions and bears. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God. And then David said, the Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of the Philistine. So the difference in him and Saul wasn't ability. It wasn't skill set. It wasn't talent. It wasn't opportunity even. The difference that David does as a great leader, it's what great leaders do. He sees the situation clearly. He walks up to the battlefield for the first time and he sees what is going on clearly. When leaders see a situation clearly, it changes how they act and it changes how they react. Have you ever acted out of fear? Have you ever acted out of stress? Have you ever acted out of ambition? Or maybe you've reacted out of disappointment or anger or frustration? Sure, we all have. We've all done that. Why? Because ultimately we're like Saul and we put our hope into something other than God. When we put our hope into something other than God, it keeps us from seeing things clearly. When we put our money in hope and money, when we put our hope in money, when we put our hope in relationships, when we put our hope in our abilities, when we put our hope in our success and our reputation, when we put our hope in those things, whatever that combination may be, it may be one or two or three of those things. When we put hope in those, it prevents us from seeing clearly and we live like Saul. But there's another way for us to live. There's another way for us to lead. There's a better way for that to happen. When we have hope like David did, when our hope is in God, and I'm not talking like just kind of hope, like the church saying like, oh yeah, I trust in God, I go to church this week. But I'm talking about when we know who God is, when we believe that he is who he says he is, when we have a relationship with him that changes everything about us, when we believe that he loves us and has a plan for us that's greater than any plan we could have, when our hope is like that, we see things clearly. Let's look back at the story and see how David could see so clearly. The Philistine came closer and closer to David with the shield bearer in front of him. When the Philistines looked and saw David, he despised him because he was just a youth, healthy and handsome. So David's doing this. He's going out to war, and Goliath doesn't like it. He said to David, am I a dog that you come against me with sticks? And then he cursed David by his gods, said, come here, the Philistine called to David, and I'll give your flesh to the birds of the sky and the wild beasts. So this is going down. Like the fight is on. David is walking down the hill. Goliath is in the valley. He sees him coming, and he's like, this is who you're sending to fight me? This little boy is coming to fight me? Look what David says to the Philistine. You come against me with a sword, spear, and javelin, which are pretty legitimate things at that time to come against somebody with. But I come against you in the name of the Lord of armies, the God of the ranks of Israel. You have defied him. Today the Lord will hand you over to me. Today I'll strike you down, remove your head, and give the corpses of the Philistine camp to the birds of the sky and the wild creatures of the earth. He goes on to say, then all the world will know that Israel has a God. And this whole assembly will know that it's not by the sword or by the spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's. He will hand you over to us. And this is an amazing story of how putting your hope in the right thing helps you see clearly. And so for the next couple of minutes here, I want to hopefully encourage you, hopefully challenge you in your leadership, whatever that looks like, no matter how great you think that is or how small that is. If that's leading a company, leading a home, leading yourself, leading a few people, whatever it is, hopefully this will encourage and challenge you to think, to reevaluate where you put your hope. Because when you put your hope in God, it will change how you see things. Look back in verse 46. It says this, today the Lord will. That's huge. The Lord will hand you over to me. David understood that when his trust was in God, he understood what we need to understand. The outcome is not yours to control. The outcome is not yours to control. When you trust in God, the outcome is not yours to control. When my hope is in me, when my hope is in the people around me, when your hope is in you, when your hope is in the situation, the people around you, I promise you that will leave you at times laying awake at night. That will leave you at times staring at the ceiling thinking, I just don't think this is going to work out. Either because of them or maybe more often because of you. Right? Like I can't do this. I can't solve this. I can't handle this. Like we said at the beginning, when we trust in something that lets us down, we lose hope. And nobody's let me down more in my life than guess who? Me. Right? There's not a day that goes by that I don't stop and think, did I make a dumb decision right then? Did I handle that the right way? Did I say the right thing? I let myself down. It's a guarantee. Guess what? People are going to let you down. A company is going to. Your kids, if you've got kids, it's a great place to be like, amen, they do let us down sometimes, right? Because they're growing, they're learning. We let ourselves down. Things let us down. If we trust in those things, it's not a matter of if we lose hope, but when we will lose hope. David's trust is in God, and he said, today the Lord will hand you over to me. He didn't say, listen, I've been practicing a lot with this sling. Like, you guys should see me out in the field. I'm legit. Like, I'm good with this thing. And he probably was, but that's not what he said. He didn't say, hey, I know y'all doubt me, but you should see the stones I got. Like, they're the newest model. I polished them up, all right? They're going to do some damage today. He didn't trust in those. No, he didn't look to anyone to control the situation other than the one who's ultimately in control. Was he ready? Yes. Was he prepared? Yeah, he said, listen, you should see me when I'm watching sheep, when the bear comes, when the lion comes, and they take a sheep. Like, I'm going to be honest, if it's me and I got 100 sheep and a lion gets one, I'm going to be like, hey, Pops, I lost one today, okay? But I still got 99. David's like, no, get back over here. He goes to war. He goes to fight. Like, he had the talent. He was ready. He had done all he could do. But ultimately, he knew that this depended on God. And I would say, be prepared. Be the best at what you do. Work hard, learn, grow, be ready. But ultimately, the outcome of your job, the outcome of your family is God's. And how could that change your approach as you lead through those situations? If you did all you could do, but you knew that the outcome is God's. David didn't just lead knowing the outcomes weren't his to control. He also led through humility. Look what it says here in verse 46. Then all the world will know that Israel has a God, and this whole assembly will know that it's not by the sword or the spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's. The battle is the Lord's. David comes out maybe you know this story. He does his sling. He throws a rock. It hits Goliath in the head. It knocks him down, knocks him out. David goes, takes Goliath's sword, and cuts his head off. Yeah, you thought video games for your kids are violent, okay? That's what he does. And the Philistines run, and Israel chases them, and it says that they slaughtered them. And in an instant, David became the most popular man in all of Israel. Now, he literally just won a war single-handedly. Everybody now knew who he was. He did, this is important, he did what the king couldn't and wouldn't do. David was willing to. They were literally, if you read about this, they were singing his name in the streets. There's never been a moment in David's life like this, ever. He is the man. Everyone is saying how great he is, but David knew something very important. He knew that it's not about him. He knew that this battle was God's. Life was about people knowing who God is and about God getting the glory. David knew it wasn't about him. Saul had forgotten this. See, Saul, ultimately, the people said, hey, we want a king, and they picked Saul, and God did anoint Saul as king. God did place him in that position of leadership. He did make him king. And Saul had won battles, and Saul's fame began to grow, and the more success Saul had, the more Saul lost sight of what's important, because what's true about Saul is true about you and me, and that's that success confuses us. Success confuses us. Here's why success confuses us. Because success makes us put our hope in ourselves. When you're just new at the job, your hope is in the people around you. Like, I'm probably going to mess up. I hope they help me out and forgive me, right? But you have a victory. You have success. You learn a little bit. You grow a little bit. And success begins to get confusing. Because you begin to look at your success stories and think you're the main character in them. You begin to look at your success stories and think that it's all about you, which then leads you to place more and more trust in your own ability, in yourself. We know this is true. We've seen this in person. We start in humility. We see a leader lead in humility. They have some success, and it turns all about them. They start earning more now than they've ever earned, and it's because of them. They rise in the ranks faster, and it's all about them. The success they have confuses them. But when we hope in God, even maybe especially when we hope in God in the middle of our success, it'll cause us to do this. It'll cause us to live humbly. In the middle of our success, in the middle of the promotion, in the middle of our kids behaving and being what we've been trying to get them to be, in the middle of things going well, instead of being confused by our success, we will choose to live humbly because we see clearly that success is because of God, not because of us. David knew his place in the battle here. And he knew later in life, even as he becomes king, that he wasn't the ultimate king, that God was. The story we are part of is not primarily a story about us. Your story is not primarily a story about you. It's a story about God. Now, is he going to use you and is he going to do something in you and through you? Yes, I hope and I pray that you allow him to do that and that he does that. But at the end of the day, all of our stories are about God, not about us. And to lead well, we have to know that we're not in control of the outcomes, and we have to live humbly because it's not about us. But look what he does in David's life. These things do for him. It says, when others see obstacles, we see opportunities. When we see clearly, when we know that the outcome's not in our control, when we choose to walk humbly, then what others see as obstacles, we will see as opportunities. We'll see these moments as opportunities. Look in verse 45, it says, you come against me. We have verse 45. You come against me with a sword and a spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord of armies, the God of the ranks of Israel. Right? That's what David sees. He says, I come against you in the name of the Lord of armies. Everybody else is standing on this hill and they see Goliath. They see something that terrifies them. Saul, who's the king, only sees an obstacle to him being a king. But David sees an opportunity for God to get glory. He sees clearly in this situation like great leaders do. Where there's a problem that shows up, there's also an opportunity for God to show up and others to see him. And anytime you lead anything, you lead a church, you lead a company, you lead a shift at the company, you lead your family, yourself, well, there's going to be obstacles. You know that. You know there's obstacles in every aspect of leadership. There's points of pain and problem. People will say this can't work, you can't do it. There's trials. But if your trust is in the right place, you don't lose hope, because where others see the obstacles, you see the opportunity. You see the opportunity for God to show up. But that only works if we trust in God and not ourselves. David saw the opportunity not for himself, not because he trusted in how great he was. No. He saw the opportunity because he trusted in God, and he never lost hope standing before the giant while everybody else was on the run. While they're all fleeing, terrified, he saw the opportunity for God to get more glory. I love David. We're going to see as we continue to go that David makes some bad decisions. There's moments in David's life where he's a bad leader. But at the beginning here, David as a young man in this moment, he has put his trust completely and fully in God. He totally trusts in God. And because of where he placed his trust, he had hope. And here's what I want us to know. The same is true for you. The same is true for me. A person who trusts in God always has hope. A person who trusts in God always has hope. And here's why. Because what you place your trust in, your hope depends on. If your hope is in God, if your trust is in God, then your hope is dependent on him. And God is always in control. God's never worried. God's never concerned. God doesn't make a mistake with your life. God is always in control. And so when we trust in him, then our hope is dependent on him, and we can release that worry. We can be prepared. We can be ready, but we can trust in God. And if we're honest, we know that trusting in ourselves, trusting in our own ability, trusting in our own money, trusting in the people around us is just too stressful. That's a lot of weight to carry. Hey, I've got to make sure this family grows to love Jesus. I've got to make sure this business succeeds. I've got to make sure of this. I. That's a lot of pressure for us to carry that we can't live up to. We should put our trust in God. What if we knew there's just too many variables in our life for us to control the outcome? There's just too many. Just think about your week last week. There's so many things out of your control. We can't possibly control the outcome. So what if we chose to lean into the one who can control them? How would that get rid of worry and expectations and stress? I think if we leaned in to the one who is in control, it would change how we lead everything in our lives. I've got a few questions for us to think about as we wrap this up. The first question is this. What do you put your trust in? What do you put your trust in? Right? Saul put it in himself. The nation of Israel put it in the king. What do you put your trust in? Everybody puts their trust in something. What do you put your trust in? Here's the second question for us to think about. Are you looking at your circumstances clearly? This is what a great leader does. They see their circumstances and they see it clearly. But I believe that we only do this when our trust is in God. That's when we see it clearly. So I'd ask you to evaluate, are you looking at your circumstances clearly? And the last question I have for you is this. How is the obstacle in front of you actually an opportunity? I don't know what's happening in your life, but something is. Maybe there's an obstacle at your job. Maybe there's an obstacle at home. Maybe there's an obstacle in your relationship. How is that obstacle an opportunity for God to be shown? For God to get the glory? I imagine what it would be like for us to get up tomorrow morning and to say, before we even get out of bed, today, God, I'm going to put my hope and trust in you. Like, I'm just giving it to you today. When you're winning at business and you think, man, I got this. I'm doing good. You just stopped and said, God, I'm putting my trust in you. My hope is in you. When things seem to be collapsing around you and you're starting to panic, you're starting to worry, you stop and say, no. My trust is in God. Imagine putting our trust in God both when things are good and when things are not so good. If you do that, you always have hope. You'll always have hope. If you bow your heads and close your eyes, we're going to close in song in just a moment. But I just want to encourage you that we do serve a faithful God that we can put our trust in. Even when it might not seem like that makes sense, even when it's uncomfortable, even when others don't understand it, you can trust God. It will change how you see everything about your life. But that begins with a relationship with God. And if you're here today and you've never trusted in Jesus to be your Savior, I just want to be real honest with you. Your trust has to be in you. You've got to carry this. You've got to handle this. You've got to figure life out. It's all on you. But that's not the way God intended. God gave his son Jesus to die on a cross for your sins and for my sins so that he could invite you into a relationship with him, so that as your creator, you could serve him as God, that you could put your trust in him as God. And so if you've never done that, I would love to have a conversation with you today after the service. I'll be around. I'd love to talk to you about that. But if you're here today and you would say, yes, I am a follower of Jesus, I have trusted in him to be my Savior. Was that a one-time decision or is that a daily decision? Was your trust in him for that moment? Or do you get up every day and say, today, God, no matter what success, no matter what heartache, no matter what good, no matter what bad, no matter what comes, my trust is in you and I will not lose hope because my hope is in God. God, we love you and thank you for who you are. There is no one else, there is nothing else that is worthy of our trust and our hope, because all else fails, all else disappoints, all else collapses and lets down at some point except for you, God. Because you were before all things, you have created all things, you are in control. And may we be like David, may we see clearly as we lead ourselves, as we lead our homes, as we lead in work. May we see clearly, God, and put our trust in you no matter what stands before us so that our hope doesn't fail. God, we love you. We thank you. In your name we pray. Amen.